Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Transformation Initiative's quarterly training for providers. Today's topic is going to be on the finances of transformation and employment services, which we know is a big topic for a lot of providers that are thinking about shifting the focus of their services. So I think we have a good training here today with a lot of really solid information for you all. Before I hand it over to our two presenters, this training is hosted by the Minnesota Transformation Initiative, or MTI. MTI is a project that is funded by the Minnesota Department of Human Services to support the transition of people with disabilities receiving some minimum wages into competitive integrated employment. We do a number of activities, a lot of which is providing training and technical assistance to providers across Minnesota that are interested in transforming their services. And a lot of the work that we do around provider transformation is grounded in these research-based 10 essential elements of provider transformation that were developed by our partners at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. So you can see the 10 elements up on here, just to ground what we're talking about today in these 10 elements. This topic of finances, while it touches every element, because it's obviously important to how organizations are run, it most clearly fits in this element of reallocated and restructured resources. So good thing to keep in mind for the presentation today. And we have two very knowledgeable and experienced speakers joining us today to share their wealth of information with us. First up, we'll have Brian Benshoff, the former CEO of MRCI, and then John Alexander, the CEO of Kaposia, and I'll give them the opportunity to introduce themselves a little bit further, but I'll turn it over to our first speaker. Brian, go for it.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to learn a little bit about finances for transformation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about myself, but just to give you a little bit of background, as the title says, I am retired. I've been retired from MRCI for about 9 months. I spent 40 years at MRCI, and that gave me great perspective and transformation to community employment. I started there when the organization was a sheltered workshop. And as I often tell people, we were in transformation for many, many years. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the planning financially for making kind of that final transition from doing in-house work to community employment as a full-time program service. MRCI really transitioned away from in-house work, 10, 15 years ago. But during COVID, we made the final decision to make a complete turn to employment first programming, where we only did competitive community employment. So during that time period of being shut down during COVID, we made the decision to close all of our in-house facility work and move all of our programs into the community. So I'm going to talk from the perspective of the financial part of that transition. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how we came to that, how we planned for a whole program change, but we'll focus in on the financial planning. So next slide. Next slide. So my scope today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the planning process from my experience. And what MRCI did is not necessarily what everybody else should do or can do. We're going to talk about it in the framework of what can you do. I'm going to try to give you some of the basics, assumptions, and ideas that go into planning a financial transformation with a new program. I'm going to focus on our community employment services. At MRCI, we did both extended employment, community employment, and we also did day service competitive employment. So I'm going to focus kind of in that financial transition to both of those. If you want to go to the next slide. So there are some critical assumptions that I'm going to make in this process is talking about this. First one is the process that you've gone through to decide that you're going to make this transformation to an all community program. Have you spent the time basically looking at your program goals, timelines, projections? Are they clearly defined? And so what we're going to talk about is a financial part of a larger plan. And I'm going to make some assumptions that you're getting to the point of wanting to plan for it financially, but you've also done some of the groundwork and are looking at some of the process in becoming a community-based employment first program. Have you taken the time to clearly articulate, how this transformation will benefit the people you serve and strengthen your organization? And I look at that from both ways, both angles, because going into this, MRCI felt strongly that doing employment first, competitive employment with our participants was really good for them. It's good for them financially. It was good for them in becoming completely integrated into the community, especially in the employment setting. And we also looked at it from the standpoint of this is going to benefit our organization. And I want to tell you just a little bit about kind of how we were doing supported employment up to that point. We had a competitive employment program that placed people, the traditional job placement person, job coaches. We probably placed about 80 or 90 people a year in competitive employment. But we also had a very large supported employment program where we had about 25 plus work enclaves, work crews. And that had been a model we started back in the late 80s, early 90s, and had progressed over the years. And from a financial standpoint, we were at a point with those services where it was becoming very difficult to sustain that financially. Like everybody else, that model worked somewhat like in-house work. We had to rely on employers to contract with us. We had staffing for those enclaves. We had transportation to get people to those enclaves. And over the years, our ability to charge enough money to cover the cost of doing that service had become very difficult, to the point where we were really losing money on every enclave that we operated. So part of that transition for us was also sustainability of the organization, looking forward. And when we started this process 3 or 4 years before COVID, planning for this, we felt that we had to do it because we were not going to be able to financially support doing it the way we were doing. Next thing is your organization really committed to take the challenge of system transformation on a major scale? This financial transformation doesn't work real well if you still have a foot in both worlds. I'm going to talk a few minutes about the things you need to do to be thinking about how you structure the finances of your organization. And a lot of the cost savings to make it work come from not doing all the things you used to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. As I mentioned, the financial part of this is really about part of the bigger plan of transition. And what we're going to look at and doing good financial planning will help you with board of directors. It'll help you with your stakeholders. If you can make the case that this program, the way you're going to do it, is good financially for the organization, and most importantly, that it's really good for the people you serve, that's going to be an important part of the communication. And then looking at, even on the financial side, who are the stakeholders that you need to have at the table with you as you do this financial planning? For us, it was important to have our board of directors, obviously, on board and understanding why this was a good way to go. But also ultimately it's the community, parents, funders, all the people that need to help make that transition happen for you. Next slide. So what we have to do really is just kind of step back and say, we have to kind of step away from what we're doing currently. And everybody's in a different place. So I may be, preaching to the choir here to people who have already made this move. But if you're on the fence and you're trying to decide, where you're going to go, this is the point where you sit down financially and say, let's take out a clean piece of paper. Let's start from the beginning. And in many ways, we need to look at it in a simple income versus expense approach. We look at what are our funding streams? What are the dollars that will be coming into the organization? And again, some of you are day providers, some of you are day service providers and extended employment providers. All of you have financial streams that are coming into your organizations that pay for the services you're providing. And our first step in the income side is to look at all of those streams and look at what are some of the things that we're not doing that would be beneficial. How do we fund single site competitive employment? How do we find ways to do the new things that we wanted to do? So, again, you're looking at things that maybe you weren't doing before, streams of funding that weren't available to you that you need to tap into, whether it be vocational rehab, funding up front for placement, whether it be extended employment funding, day service, community employment, waiver funding, all the things that are possible for you as an organization, and start thinking about what do we need and how much revenue can we tap into for this transition, and where does it fit? That means learning about each of those financial streams. It means taking the time to fully understand, and there's complexities, a lot of complexities involved. And those of you that are doing it now, I've been away from it for 9 months now, so I'm not fully up to speed on what all is happening, but the connection between VR, DHS, waiver funding, extended employment funding, you need to really understand all the connections that are now available and how those work together to fund what you want to do. When we talk about a single site, one-on-one type funding situation, that's considerably different than a 1-to-4 or staff ratio that a lot of you use in waiver funding. So we're not going to get into the detail of all that today. We don't have time, but to take the time and learn, what are all the possibilities that you have for helping fund your program. One of the big things that in this process, going next from income to expenses, and this is where we spent a lot of time planning and thinking and did some pretty radical changes in how we do things. Develop your staffing to meet your program model that you've kind of decided to do and that you've modeled that maximizes the efficiency and cost effectiveness. And that sounds simple, but in reality, what we did was sit down with a piece of paper and look at how do we fund the process of finding somebody, or how do we staff the process of finding somebody a job and then providing long-term support for that model. So I mentioned earlier that we had been pretty much a traditional supported employment program. On the competitive work side, we had a number of job placement professionals, And we did the process kind of the old-fashioned way. We found somebody a job. The job placement person handed that person off to a job coach. Ultimately, a job coach handed that person off to a long-term support person, whether it be in our DT&H program or in our extended employment program. We looked at that model and said, you know, this is really not efficient and it's very expensive. So we adopted a program model, staffing model that basically centered everything on one staff. We created a position we call a community employment specialist. That person had a caseload of participants. Their job was to find the job, work with the employer and develop the natural supports, provide the short-term job coaching, and then step back and provide long-term follow-up. So we basically broke down that chain of professional staff down to one person. And that worked really well, and it continues to work well. We had our enclave model. We had job placement people to help them get connected. We had working crew supervisors on site with those people. So during the summer, we were closed with COVID. Each one of those enclaves, we just went to the employer and we said, you know, we're not going to do it this way anymore. And we asked all of those employers to hire our clients. And we spent time with them explaining the whole concept of them being the supervisor and us being the background support. And we had about 60% of the employers, companies we worked with, we said, great, we're ready to go. And the ones that didn't, we kept working with and eventually either moved people to a new job or they just didn't want to do it that way. But we were pretty surprised and pretty pleased with how many of our employers stepped up. And it taught us a lesson in that staffing model that we don't have to be at a work site with our clients all day long. And we adopted the community support specialist model with that group of people as we found them. Basically, they became competitive employees with that company. So it's a way of stopping and thinking about not getting hung up on how you've been doing it for the past 20 years like we were. And we kind of went, boy, I wish we had done this sooner, because it eliminated a lot of cost. All of a sudden, we weren't doing all the things we used to do. The other big cost that we eliminated in that plan was transportation. We elected not to do transportation anymore. So people still ask me, well, how can you do that? We talked with our teams, with our funders, with our employers, and we said, we can no longer afford to drive everybody everywhere and provide transportation to competitive jobs. And through good planning at a team level and the adoption of just saying this is the way it's going to work for us, we've been able to maintain all the jobs we've put people in without providing daily transportation. And that saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. We were losing money on transportation like most people do. And we kind of decided we can't be everything to everybody. We've talked for years about natural supports, and the crux of all of this comes down to the beauty of having employers really step up and be the employer for the clients. And what we have found in this process is that most employers are more than willing to do that. And most of the people we had already placed, even in enclaves, they knew them. They were very comfortable with stepping in. We had a few employers say, we were always amazed that you did it this way, because we were very capable of providing that support. So we're still in the background. We stayed in the background, and our employment support coordinators were there to step in at any time needed, but we weren't on site anymore with any of the people we had placed in jobs. And, you know, from the standpoint of good programming, good employment, our clients really adapted well to that. They now see themselves as employee of that company. They don't look at it as I work for MRCI, I get a paycheck from MRCI, even though I work in a different company. So through that process, we were able to eliminate we eliminated our 14C certificate. We don't have that, didn't have that anymore when I left. Everybody was getting paid the prevailing wage for the company they work for, not the necessarily just the minimum wage. The next step I would suggest is that you examine your corporate and overhead costs. We've been talking about direct costs to the program. We sat down and did some planning and looking at all the other costs. As we moved everybody out of facilities, we had eliminated capital costs, cash costs, all related to buildings. We closed all of our in-house work facilities, saved millions of dollars in the cost of operating those things. And I was, you don't stop and look at that sometimes, but we were a big organization. And when you look at the cost you're spending to maintain buildings, maintaining production facilities, equipment, forklifts, all those things, those costs were huge. So we also were able then in the process of looking at our corporate positions, our HR department, our facility management, and we were able to streamline and make some cuts here and there that reduce the overhead that we charged to these programs. And there's quite a bit of that. Transportation was also a very large one. So, the process is really examining everything that's in the way you've been doing things, and now taking a clean at what do we need to run this program? What do we need in some ways to run the organization? And the more costs you can take out of overhead and the direct expense of providing those services helps you start to build a model that's sustainable over the long haul. And that's kind of the key. Ultimately, we have to be able to sustain this program for a long time. Next slide. So what we did and what I suggest going into this is to start building a budget for your new service and a test model. Take the dollars and expenses and revenue that you've identified and start building a budget, a 12-month revenue, an expense budget. And then what we did was we took and built some models. We just did those in Excel spreadsheets with a lot of formulas. So we could plug in revenue, we could plug in expenses, and most importantly, we could plug in the numbers of people that we are going to serve. So it was kind of interesting because anytime you start a new program, obviously you have to phase it in. So you can't build a 12-month model day one having all the revenue and all the expense changes that you plan. So you build it around the idea that over 12 months you're going to phase in and build that model. Kind of accounting for the staggering of participant entrance into the service, new referrals, taking on who you took on, who you had in the program initially, and moving forward. And from that, we were able to come up with a pretty accurate budget projection of what it would cost us to make that change. Obviously, because we did it pretty dramatically, there was a lot of things we didn't account for. And over time, we had to make adjustments as we went. But our community employment program, when I left, was profitable, and it hadn't been prior to that. And to give you a sense of the success and how people adjusted to that, I mentioned earlier we'd probably have placed about 70 or 80 people in competitive employment, I think in prior to COVID 2019. When I left in 2022, we were well over 200 new competitive employment placements, successful placements. So the model, the way we did it, worked well and was well accepted. We saw referrals jump significantly, especially from the VR providers who made referrals to us. We saw people wanting to do that. And we started to really focus heavily on our day services program, which was also community-based, the non-employment side of that program, being very deliberate and sizing that program appropriately, with keeping our focus on getting people into employment, maintaining that employment first approach. And I don't have all the numbers as to where that's at right now, but we were starting to make more and more transition from the day services program into the employment side. So that really is kind of the short and simple approach that we took, and we're really just about to the end of our time. I wish I could spend probably half the day talking to you about this and how we do it, but I'm going to turn it over now, Danielle, to questions if I'm on time for that.
Feel free to take some of my time, Brian.
Okay. And if you do have questions, if you want to put them in the comment section, I can get back and answer some of those as well. So I don't want to take too much of John's time here. So
I think we've got plenty of time, so we're in good shape for people to ask questions now, but you can also wait till the very end.
Okay, cool. Yeah, go ahead. So
either way, but if anyone has any specific questions for Brian about what he's just shared, feel free to drop those in the chat or in the Q&A section. You can also, I believe everyone has the ability to raise hand, and then I can unmute you so that you can ask the question if you'd rather talk it out. All right, one question, Brian. How many clients do the community employment specialist support?
We tried to keep that caseload at a manageable level. I think when I left, they were probably at about 25 to 30 clients. You really can't have a huge caseload initially, because you are doing a lot of job development, a lot of employer contacts, and some of that initial job coaching. So even with that ratio, we still were more efficient than the way we did it before. We had 7 locations, so we had numerous job placement people and a fairly large cadre of job coaches. So I don't know what they're running now, but that worked pretty well. Very efficient. They all had leased cars, and they spent all their time in the community. Really didn't have offices.
All right, another question. When someone got a job and needed, say, 20 hours of one-on-one job coaching, what would happen to the rest of people on their caseload?
Well, that's just a balancing of their time and how they manage their time. So and the other part of that is this group of community support specialists work together. So they all were somewhat cross-trained with each other's caseloads. So they could help each other. That's how we covered vacations and those kind of things. Those staff met on a pretty regular basis on Teams and communicated. They had huddle meetings. So we kind of worked together on that. And that's pretty much sometimes how I would say that probably that intensive job coaching, that intense amount probably was somewhat unusual, because again, we're working pretty close with that employer to really provide a lot of the training. One of the mindset changes this year is, again, we're not the ones doing all of that. So we might be helping that client more with the adjustment to that work site than we are with teaching them the skills of how to do that job. So you'll find, I think, that your job coaches have less of that really intense upfront training. And again, the employers are doing what they would do with any other employee. So we're helping them with around the edges with, what adaptations they might need and what accommodations they might need. But it's really moral support and helping them kind of make that transition. I think it works better.
Okay, then we'll keep moving with John Alexander's portion, but there'll be time for more questions at the end that we can pull both Alex and Brian into answering. So
All right, thank you, everybody.
yes. Oh wait, one more that came up
Okay.
quickly, Brian, for you. Did you use customized employment very frequently?
Yes, that is part of the process. I should have mentioned that. Our staff are trained on that. They have been for the last 3 or 4 years. And obviously, that's kind of part of the placement process, but being creative and, again, looking at ways that can fold into it. There's somebody capable of doing something of their own on their own business, or how are we really creative within that work setting with that employer to adapt to a job? Yep. Key piece of it. You need to understand that and learn about it if you don't.
Oh, thanks, Brian. All right. And for now, I'll turn it over to Alex. Again, more questions at the end.
All right, good job, Brian.
Thank you.
Brian did a great job of talking about kind of the planning process, and so I'm not going to get into that as much as really just, you can go to the next slide, kind of focusing on the revenue side of it and comparing the different rates and number of units that you can bill. I get questions about this a lot, and I hear things like, well, we just can't make it work on the employment side because we lose so much revenue. And so I wanted to kind of just really focus on that part of it. You can go to the next slide. So here are the rates comparing day services and employment support services. And on the one side, you can see that includes all the different group rates for ESS as well as for day services. And I picked a couple of these. If you haven't seen some of these numbers, I'm going to give kudos. I think Lori Schlutenhofer from OP, Opportunity Partners, pulled this together and passed it to Lynn Noren, who passed it to me. But it's helpful. And I'm using 2024 numbers because we're almost there. So if you go to the next one, if you look at a situation where you have people in a 1-to-4 situation, either in employment support, so in a group model, or in center, or even in the community where you're serving people at a 1-to-4 ratio, the rates for ESS are slightly lower, but you can bill more units because under employment supports, you can bill your indirect time for that. And so I added in, if you see this, typically, I think most people have a 6-hour day. I know that's not always true. There's probably more people doing shorter days than that now, but we'll just stick with that. Whereas if people are in a crew situation, they might also be working 6 hours a day, but your staff person can bill an extra, I just put in an hour and a half, for their paperwork time at the end of the day. And in case you haven't heard, Maura is working on trying to allow for indirect time on the day services side, which just seems like a no-brainer to me. But you can see that you end up slightly ahead in this scenario of a 1-to-4 situation where it's an extra, $7 a day or something, and you can amortize that out and see that you should be fine if you are in this kind of a scenario with the rates that we get under employment supports. On the next one, I compare more with what Brian talked about and with what we do at Kaposia in terms of employment supports, where we provide it at a 1-to-1 staffing and continue to compare it to a day services model. right? Our expectation for our staff is to bill 35 hours a week. That's 7 hours a day. You know, some of them can get a little closer to 8 hours a day, but that equals 140 units per week. And if you take the 1423, it comes out to just under $2,000 per week. Under the day services scenario, you'll see with 4 people, it's $99 a day, almost $400 a week, et cetera. It's a little less than $1,600 a week. So it's almost $400 a week difference, which if you amortize that out over a year, it's almost $20,000 a week. I picked 48 weeks because people take time off, et cetera, et cetera. You know, but you can see there's clearly a business model to be made here. And I think Brian hinted at that, but I'm giving you the actual numbers. We can talk a little bit more about staff billing 35 hours a week, but you can see the math comes out that it's really better if you can bill more of people's time. Most people I don't think are going to really want much longer than a 24 or 6 hour day under day services. I think we're seeing a lot more people have shorter days even than that. And so it gets muckier, I think, versus really if you're serving our staff, people generally serve 15 to 18 people under employment supports. We find that's a good number. And then you can balance your schedule out throughout the week, depending on when people need it. And then just fill in your day from there, if that makes sense. Next one. So then Brian talked a little bit about this, but there's really a change in mindset as you shift from one type of service to another. I think it's hard even for some folks who have worked in day services to make that shift just because they've been doing one thing for so long, but that's really the key. It's in terms of thinking of billable hours as you're doing your budgeting. You really want a goal to be able to bill for most or not all of your staff's time. I know that there's at least one more member that implemented a bonus system for billable hours, that if they hit certain numbers, they get a bonus. We've never done that. I feel like you're getting paid to work those hours, and so you should be able to bill those hours. One of the key things in this also is making sure that they have enough hours to bill. We found this particularly under the employment development side, that if staff don't have enough hours to bill, say, you know, for us, it's typically about 6 to 8 people that they're working with at any given time in the discovery and customized employment process. And so if somebody takes off or whatever, we had someone literally went to Russia for 6 months and we heard about it a month later. And so that eliminates one of the people that they can bill for. And so you want to make sure that there's enough time for them to be able to bill. If you think of it like, you know, the airlines industry always sells more tickets than they have seats because they know that some people aren't going to show up. And I think it's a similar kind of thinking around billable hours, that you have more than you need. Because some people are going to need more this month, some people are going to need less, and it's always a balance for those folks to be able to work through their time. I think the next slide is about what you can bill for. Here's the direct services, you know, under employment support services. I always say it's just about anything is billable. Now, it's not everything, because when we were developing this list, I tried to get in and anything else the team says is billable, but DHS, of course, wouldn't let us do that. But it's just about everything that comes into play in terms of helping someone in their job and helping them train, helping get it designed, help them with transportation, help them with any sort of ongoing support that somebody might need. If there's new training that needs to come along because they add a new task for someone, any of that stuff. Anything that you need to do in terms of thinking about any of this stuff is billable. I know some people are going to say, oh, you can't just do that. No, you can just do that, because we do plan and we think about what's the best way to do things, you know, and that should be billable. So the next part of it is the indirect piece. Again, almost everything that we do for somebody is billable. You know, it's pretty hard to not fit something into one of these categories, particularly, like Brian mentioned, development and strengthening of natural work supports. You know, even just setting up transportation sometimes for people here in the metro area, trying to get people rides. can be tricky. It can take a long time. You can be on hold for who knows how long, just trying to set up rides for people. And so all that time should be billable and is billable. I won't get too deep into this. And then the last slide is just the very particular things that are not billable. Mostly if you're billing through VR or incentive payments, a couple of other things. But like I said, almost everything under this category is billable. So I didn't get too much into, but we can certainly talk about employment development and employment exploration. They're very similar services. The real difference is one person says, I want a job, and the other person says, I'm not sure I want a job yet. And so, but it's, again, comes back to how many hours that person can bill during their day, during their week, during their month, etc. That makes it, you know, economically viable for us as providers. I know I went through this really fast. I did this training for Region 10 and more a few months ago, and I think it took slightly longer in terms of about 10 minutes instead of 15, but we can go on to the next slide and just see if people have questions.
All right, so again, thanks, Alex. So again, you can put in the Q&A questions in there. I actually don't think you all have access to the chat, so drop your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask the question verbally, which I know might be a little easier for some of the more technical questions. So, and while we wait for people to ask their own questions, Alex, I just anticipate that there are some people who are hearing that your employment consultants bill for 35 plus hours a week, and that feels unreachable to a lot of people. And I know that you're just explaining like how, you know, everything is pretty much billable, but I'm thinking, for example, of driving time to and from places. Is that billable? If you could maybe just talk a little bit more about how Kaposia supports their employment consultants to get such a high percentage of billable hours within their week.
It's a little easier because we're in the metro, so the drive time isn't really as much of an issue. But as I mentioned, when you're driving, you're often thinking about what you need to do for that person. It can be a little bit of a gray area, and some people might not be as comfortable with that, but they don't spend a lot of time driving. We tracked it down, and it was like 5-6 hours a week that people are actually in their cars. So there's a lot of stuff that has to get done in terms of that indirect time, all the paperwork that we have to do. I know that's been a priority for more with their DEET committee to try to see if there's things that we could cut back. But for us, I mean, I mentioned 15 people, that's a half hour a day per person, you know? And so if you kind of think of it, that's not really a lot. And if you're doing, you know, you see someone, you know, for a half hour, an hour, maybe a couple times a week, and then you have all the other things that have to go with it. You know, it's not real hard to get there. 2 hours a week per person on average. And then some folks are going to have, you know, initial training. You're going to have other things that come up, meetings, etc. It's not real hard to get to that 35. And I know that I hear a lot from staff, all you care about is money. And I'm like, well, that's true, but you put 40 hours down in your time card every week. I think you care about money too. And so what are you doing if you're not billing that time? And so it comes back to us as the supervisors, managers, leaders, to make sure that they have enough work to do. And getting to that 35 shouldn't be that hard. Now, if you don't have enough people, then that's clearly an issue. If they're only serving 5-6 people, and then that's again back on us as managers to figure out what other kinds of things could they be doing. Are they maybe going to be part of a different service for half the day and then provide employment supports for half the day? You know, it may mean that if you have limited number of people who are working, you maybe spread that across more people. I'm just giving you the model that we use. And it's really not hard for our staff to get to 35. It's often, I'm like, make sure you're not billing more than 40, you know, unless you're getting into overtime, but that doesn't happen a whole lot either. So.
All right, we got a few questions going here, and both Brian and Alex, feel free to jump in on any of them. Okay, so can you please repeat your average caseload size for point of service positions providing ESS? Is this consistent with other services like EDS, EES, DSS? Thank you.
I'll tell you ours, it's for EDS, it's anywhere from 6 to 10, depending on the level of support that a person might need. We really want to spend a lot of time upfront with that person so that we really do the process well. We'll ask for roughly 20 hours a month per person. So depending on who it is, under EDS, and then I said I think we're 15 to 18. Part of that is staffing issues. We prefer to keep it to around 15 to make sure that we're doing a good job of really supporting people where and when they need it and how they need it. I think Brian's numbers are higher.
Yeah, and that's probably an average in the sense that it's lower in some situations and higher in others. But you have to look at, what can you effectively do? And as John's pointed out, how can you support that financially? How many billable hours? And on the non-day service side and extended employment, it's about hours that the person works. There's lots of different ways we look at that. So.
All right, next question. Do you have people who only need an hour of support each week? How does that fit your model?
That's pretty easy. If person is really in a customized job that really fits their needs, they have a lot of natural supports around them. There's not a lot we need to do. One of the things at Kaposia that we've been trying to work towards is to help those people leave our services because they don't really need us. But so many families are worried about, well, what if something happens? What if? Well, we end up doing more indirect for the person, doing all the paperwork, than we do providing direct supports to the person. And it just seems like that's kind of silly and almost a waste of our time for somebody that really just doesn't need us. And so one of the things I've suggested that we try to get is like a rapid reentry. So if somebody leaves our services and is on their own, that if something were to come up, that we could bring them back into services without having to do a whole intake. Social Security does something similar. I think it's up to 2 years that if they go off of Social Security, they can go right back on without having to do that. Yeah. But we don't have anything like that in our system. And I think it would be very beneficial and allow us to continue to support more people in this area when we could help people, that don't need us. They just like checking in with us and how was your vacation kinds of conversations, which are fun, but not necessarily critical to that person's success.
Yeah, and I think that's a hard decision you have to make sometimes, and sometimes it's more for us than it is for the client. It's right. It's like, it's your ultimate success as a program when you get to the point where somebody doesn't need you anymore. It's wonderful. So.
All right, next question. Can you talk about separation of staff and services that they are doing? How are your services set up to handle that?
We've found that it's better for us to separate the two. I know Brian, I think every one person does everything. And I've just had a hard time finding people that can do both job development and ongoing supports, that people typically are good at one versus the other. If you can find those folks that are good at both, then it's like, you got an all-star employee, but we've just struggled to do that. And so we've kept it separate, but I know many organizations have combined it into, one person does the whole process.
Yeah, maybe we've just been lucky. We were, we've been able to do that fairly well. But again, it's kind of where you are, what your job market. I mean, can you access people that have those still skill levels? So, but I think within either way, I think you can find efficiencies to make that work better than the way we used to do it. So we had too many people involved in the process.
And I'll be honest, there's sometimes friction between those two areas, that I think is true in any kind of organization. Sales and operations and most for-profit manufacturing companies are constantly butting heads of, you can't sell product that I can't make for you in time, Yeah. And so there's always a little bit of that. I mean, and sometimes we'll have an employment consultant who does the ongoing supports. They end up with 3 or 4 job starts in 1 week just because that's how it worked out. And we also have a team model. And so people will cover for each other. And we just figure it out as best we can, you know. It seems like it always works out that way. You have no job starts for 3 weeks and then you have 5 in 1 week.
Yeah.
So.
And I touched on it a little bit. It's really important for those staff because they are mostly remote. They don't see each other often, to set aside time to talk with each other, share what's happening. You know, that was really critical part of our culture change that went with this change. It's a culture change for your organization. And it's one of the things COVID taught us is, you know, all of a sudden we're not all around each other much. And that's really true in the community. So they have to find time to connect, share, commiserate, whatever. But that's really valuable to make sure you provide that opportunity.
Yeah, we all got really good at Zoom really quickly, but I don't think it's beneficial, especially for staff who are very human centric. They need to be around others, and parts of their job can be really frustrating, and you need to vent, and they can't always, you know, find that time. And I don't think it's always as beneficial over a medium like this to be able to share those kinds of things, and literally just being together sometimes I think is helpful. So we pushed to have more team meetings in person, at least one a month, where the whole team comes together. I just think it's really good for them. So
they also get to celebrate each other's success, and there's a lot of success, and it's fun. So,
and just thinking about that transformation piece too, I know that can be a big challenge for people who are shifting from maybe doing day supports or center-based to more community-based too, is feeling a little bit more isolated and lonely. So I can see that being beneficial for people going through transformation as well.
It's a big shift in their own mindset too, versus, you know, you have to show up and be at a place for these hours to support somebody to, oh, now I might have to be 10 or 12 different places this week. And I've got to, it's, you know, I have to be more flexible in my time. And when I see people, it's not always within those nice 8 to 4 hours. Sometimes it's in the evening, sometimes it's on the weekend. And so balancing that out and really planning, you know, can be a stretch for folks that maybe have always had a, you know, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 kind of job. So.
It's not for everybody. We didn't keep everybody. Some of those positions are filled with new people that weren't part of the old way of doing things. So some people just said, I can't do it that way, and that's okay, you know. So don't assume that every person you have in your existing staffing is going to adapt instantly to a new, you know, you do our best, but not everybody did.
And we had the same experience and continue to have the same experience.
Good advice. And I know that's a difficult one for a lot of the providers we're working with right now, is having to let some of those people go that aren't necessarily a good fit for the new model. All right, a few more questions. What would documentation look like for the additional time billed?
Oh gosh, you might be asking the wrong 2 people.
Yeah, I was gonna say, John, can you answer that?
It's been a long time since I've had to do any of it. You know, it's your case notes, it's getting ready for annuals, quarterly reports, all that kind of stuff. If you get somebody new, you know, there's a lot more that goes into it. I just haven't had to do it in a long time. It's just what I hear from our employees is I got a lot of paperwork to do, and it'd be great if we could get rid of some of it. So.
And I see we have a hand up. So I'm gonna, before we read the other questions that are written in the chat, I'm gonna turn it over, unmute Heidi Mahan here to talk and either say something or something. Go for it, Heidi.
Hey, thanks. I was just gonna answer that question for Alex. Some of that that extra time, it's phone calls, it's answering emails, it's just putting that in your notes that you spent time talking to the team, that you were talking to a parent, you were responding to emails about something at the job site or about the person. So that's partly how you document that. It's not that hard. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Thank you, Radar.
Thank you. Good to hear your voice.
Thanks, Heidi.
Sorry,
I had a feeling when I
Heidi's
saw that
nickname.
hand up that you'd have an answer for us. All right. Next question. Can you speak to billable time expectation for staff when they're providing a service reimbursed based on a milestone or outcome versus a time-based unit? How do you translate this into a 35-hour week billable time expectation?
You had to go off script on me. So I think, one, I hate milestones. I don't think they work for the population that we work with. I think there should not be an expectation. I think milestones tend to push you to get a job quickly and not necessarily an expectation of the right job for somebody. That being said, I think if you look at how many milestones you would expect from someone, how long does it take to find a job, build that into your plan, what the dollar amount is for the milestone. So I'm not going to remember exactly what they are, but let's just say it's $2,000 for a successful job placement through VR. What does that equate to in terms of, billable hours? I mean, do the math, just divide it out. So if your expectation is, you need to make one successful placement a week, then that might match up, nicely with 35 hours. So that's how I would kind of look at it. We don't do a lot of work with VR. We're doing a lot more of it, but partly because I'm just not a big fan of milestones. And I appreciate what they're trying to do with the E1MN process. And they're doing a lot more of hourly funding for customized employment, which is very helpful. Also, those rates are really good. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, they're well over $3,000 now for a successful placement. I think it was like $3,500. So, but what I think what we see is there's a balancing in there, kind of an averaging effect. Whereas you may have some people take longer than others. There's some that happen fairly quickly. So, I think it works out in the end just fine.
All right.
I'll be honest, let me just say one more thing. I hear criticisms, Kaposia only works with the easy people, which I don't know how anybody knows that other than people that work at Kaposia. So, but we don't, that's clearly not true. And part of our focus is really just making sure we get it right. And so that's part of my frustration with the milestones, is that there's a lot of people that require a lot of significant time to figure it out. I can tell you one quick story. One of our career consultants, our job developers, has been sitting outside the door of a person, just trying to develop communication with that person and growing until he could get him to come out of the room and meet him downstairs, and then keep building on that process to where, they could actually go out and talk to someone. Now, maybe somebody, when that person's working, will say, well, look out, they're pretty easy. But that whole process took a long time to build that relationship. It wasn't easy. And it's never easy in terms of, I just got a job for you because, you clearly want to work in janitorial. We really want to get it right. We want to figure out what the right job for that person is. So
that's a really good point, John. And there is a lot of that time that goes into helping somebody prepare, explore, and make that kind of emotional shift to do something that goes against their fears and everything else. So it's not always a fast process.
All right, next question. What do you see as an average hourly wage for the CES position? How is the current staffing shortage crisis affecting this model?
CES? For which position, Danielle?
Community Employment Specialist.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have two different positions. I think we're just over 20 for people that $20 an hour for people that find the jobs, and just under on average for people that help support them on their jobs.
Yeah, from our perspective, I'm trying to remember, stuff's starting to fade away fast. Our employment support coordinators are considered professional level, positions. So probably $25 or better. I don't remember exactly, but we always had the philosophy to, we really worked hard to pay well, so we keep the really good people. And that seems to work fairly well for us. Yeah, as far as the worker shortage, we were able to keep those positions filled fairly well. I think we struggled more at the direct service level with our day program. We just, we had a lot of during the end of COVID, that last year after was a struggle. So, and again, I'm not in the field right now, so I don't know if that's gotten better or worse. Same.
Yeah, we've seen wages go up a lot over the last few years.
Yeah.
So, which is good. Our employees deserve it,
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing, that was a huge benefit for the people we serve is they're making a lot more money than they used to. And when you look at what is the outcome of somebody working competitively, not for minimum wage, but for what the company pays people, which is often way more than minimum wage, our clients are benefiting from that. More benefits, more, all kinds of things. So that was really fun to watch happen. So
yeah, I actually made everybody give me the numbers last year, and we're right around $15 an hour for the individuals we serve. So.
All right, the questions keep rolling in. The next one's kind of a technical one. What software do you use for your community employment specialist and client time and attendance?
We haven't switched to Pavilion yet. We're using the old school one.
Yeah, we used a product we've had for many years called Sightline, and that's worked fine for us. So yeah, we have another program that has used that software, and it's okay. But we just that and working through our payroll system, payroll software also as well.
Do the employment coaches attend the annuals and semi?
Yes.
Yes. And our employment consultants do all of the 245D paperwork.
All right. How are you getting around using VRS for the fine stage? Isn't it written that the fine stage can be billed through the waiver only if they are found ineligible?
We do a lot of work under the plan stage. And if you find a job under the plan stage, that's just fine. Mostly because it takes so long for VR to get going. And oftentimes I think we found that if we do enough informational interviews as part of the plan stage, person finds a job. So. We do work with VR.
Thanks for clarifying. Next question is from someone you may have heard of, Don Lavin. Can you share what role middle managers play to ensure adequate work, billable hours for people working in competitive integrated employment, as well as the braiding of funding billable units in support of people supported both in CIE and or meaningful day service? Is there accountability to ensure financial stability?
Maybe he could break that down into like 4 or 5 questions.
Hey Don, how about I unmute you and you can ask? Does that sound okay? All right, Don, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I think you get the point I'm trying to raise here. I think it's really important that you have a strong middle manager structure that oversees the work that's being done, and they should be a part of the accountability in the budget process, as well as the execution of the plan. So I'm just wondering, do you do training? Do your staff have the ability to monitor the work hours that are being, if you have somebody that's coming in with 50% of their work hours billed, and they're not at where you want them to be, up in that 80-90% area. Can you talk a little bit about how the middle managers play a role, kind of monitoring and, correcting, the work that's going on?
We did a lot. Our program managers, who I guess would be the middle managers, were paid close attention to that, and there was a lot of accountability to that, and not only for the billable hours, but measuring outcomes across different elements of the program. So we had defined outcomes, for each program that spoke to quality of what they were doing, as well as the financial side of it. So fairly detailed process, but yeah, our staff were held pretty accountable to, again, they're very independent people, and we don't see them every day. So we have to account for all of their activity and their success. If you have a lot of billable hours, but you never place anybody, that's not success either. So it goes beyond just the financial side of it, even though that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, but if you don't find jobs, you're not going to get any referrals.
Right.
So, yeah, Don, you're right. Our coordinators are on the front lines, and they're like sergeants in the Army. You don't get anything done without them. And so they really keep tabs on all of that. It's not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis, they can see what gets billed. Certainly at the end of the month for folks, it's like, what happened here? And we do a lot of check-ins, at least weekly, with where people are at, because I view if I supervise someone, their performance is really on me. They have to do the things, but I need to make sure they have all the resources they need to be able to be successful. So asking the question, what do you need to be successful? And that's hard for some people to learn how to answer. And so you continue to coach them through that. And so having good people at that level, critical to your success. So.
Yeah, thanks for your answers. We're doing training with middle managers right now, and there might be some on the call. So I appreciate your addressing that. And Brian, you made a very good point that it's not just about billable hours, it's about results.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Don. All right, next question. Do your employment consultants manage their own caseloads, including getting referrals directly?
No.
Yes. Well, we obviously go through an intake process, but our employment support coordinators had a pretty close relationship with people making referrals. So yeah, I mean, they were the ones that managed the incoming referral and the process of working with the team to get things rolling. So no.
Yeah, our referrals come through actually our two directors, and then working with the coordinators in those areas to decide who's the best fit. It's often geography, but it's also personality. Who do we think would be a good fit? Sometimes it's gender too. This person would work better with a male or a female, but mostly starts with geography so that we don't have a lot of drive time.
All right, that is all of the questions that have popped up in the Q&A. So unless I'll give kind of like final call for anyone if they have any other questions to drop in the Q&A, or again, you can raise your hand and be unmuted to ask a question. So we'll just pause for a beat here for last questions. Okay. Then I'm going to thank Brian and John so much for joining us today and sharing that. Again, like this is a topic that continually comes up when the MTI team works with providers across the state about how do you make this work financially. So I think there's just so much good information. I think it was a great space to ask some of those more specific questions that can be challenging to ask in other situations. So thank you so much for joining us today. the next MTI quarterly training, the topic is to be determined. And so there is at the very end here on the next slide, I'm going to have a link to a very, very short survey, and there's an opportunity in there to put in ideas for future training topics. So if you have something there like, gosh, I would love to have a training on this, please fill out the survey and put that in there. That'd be great. But that next one will be February 15th, 2024 at 1 o'clock. And you can check the MTI website for more information about trainings and to register. And our team is working on getting our own email list for MTI now that will be around for a little bit longer. So watch for that. There'll be a way for people to sign up to receive a monthly or so email from us about what training opportunities are coming up. So it might be a little easier than having to go check our website. Thanks for joining. See you all next time. Thanks again to John and Brian for presenting today.